Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews gave the world one of the most unforgettable films of the 20th century. Yet behind the flawless harmony audiences adored, there was a hidden discord that few ever suspected. Plummer himself later confessed that working beside Andrews was far from easy, and his words carried a sting that still startles fans today. To understand why he felt this way, we must return to the set of The Sound of Music and unravel both the myths and the painful truths that shaped their story. When The Sound of Music premiered on March 2, 1965, few could have predicted the overwhelming wave it would unleash. Directed by Robert Wise and adapted from Maria von Trapp's 1949 memoir, the film was a blend of sweeping music, family drama, and historical backdrop. At first, critics were divided. Some dismissed it as overly sweet. Others worried its sentimentality wouldn't last. But the public disagreed. Within just 4 weeks, it rose to the #1 spot at the U.S. box office. By November 1966, it had surpassed Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing film in history, a record it held for 5 years. Its reach was staggering. The movie sold over 283 million tickets worldwide, played in theaters for more than 4 years, and broke box office records in 29 countries. The Academy honored it with 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, while Julie Andrews received a Golden Globe for her role as Maria. For many, the story of the governess who brought music and love to the Stern von Trapp household felt like a fairy tale come true. Yet the reality behind the camera was far less harmonious. Christopher Plummer, who portrayed Captain Georg von Trapp, later revealed that while the world embraced the film's saccharine optimism, he himself was restless, battling demons and frustrations during the shoot. Among the biggest challenges was his dynamic with Julie Andrews, an actress beloved by everyone else on set, but whose constant warmth, he admitted, grated on him. This tension would linger long after filming ended, shaping how he looked back on the role that made him a household name. For millions of fans, The Sound of Music was more than a film. It was a dream woven into melody. Yet behind its polished surface, the story told on screen was only loosely tied to the real history of the Von Trapp family. The truth was more complicated, even more tragic at times, than the script allowed. In the movie, Julie Andrews' Maria is a young nun in training who falls in love with the stern widower, Captain Von Trapp, and through music, transforms the children's lives. Their romance blossoms quickly, culminating in a joyous marriage that symbolized hope in a world at war. But Maria von Trapp herself would later admit in her 1949 memoir that her feelings were far from that storybook picture. She confessed she hadn't been madly in love with Georg when she agreed to marry him. What she did feel, with overwhelming certainty, was a deep love for the children. In her words, she married the children first, and only over time did she grow to love their father. Even the children themselves were reshaped for Hollywood. The film created Liesel, the eldest daughter who falls for a young Nazi soldier. In truth, the oldest child was Rupert, a son who became a physician in Vermont. At the time of the movie's release, he was already 54, far from the wide-eyed teenager depicted on screen. Rupert sometimes joked with his patients that he was the real Liesel, but few believed him. The escape scene, one of the film's most iconic moments, was also fiction. On screen, the Von Trapps trek across the Alps into Switzerland, carrying instruments and suitcases. In reality, the family boarded a train to Italy. Georg von Trapp, born in what was then Zadar, had Italian citizenship, which allowed the family to leave Austria legally. It was a far less dramatic departure than Hollywood presented, though the stakes were still very real. Refusing the Nazi regime's pressure to cooperate meant risking everything. These differences between film and life mattered to Christopher Plummer. He often struggled with the idea that his character had been flattened into a caricature of strictness and coldness. The real Georg was remembered as gentle, kind, and deeply devoted to his family. For Plummer, already disenchanted with the overly sentimental tone of the film, This disconnect only deepened his frustration with the project, and with the image the world would forever associate with him. While audiences were falling in love with the harmony of The Sound of Music, the atmosphere on set told a more complicated story. Julie Andrews, fresh from her triumph in Mary Poppins, was adored by the crew and cast alike. She carried herself with kindness, discipline, and a voice that lifted even the dullest day of filming. But for Christopher Plummer, that very quality became a source of irritation. He later confessed that Andrews's endless warmth and optimism made him feel as though he were being hit over the head with a Valentine's Day card every day. To him, her angelic nature felt suffocating rather than inspiring. In his own dry humor, he nicknamed her Miss Disney, a reference to the squeaky clean image she brought to the production. Rumors also swirled around Plummer's off-screen life. His scenes with Charmian Carr, the actress who played Liesl, drew whispers of a possible romance. Carr herself later admitted she had a crush on Plummer, describing him as perfect with his sharp wit and refined accent, but she denied any affair. What she did confirm, however, was that it was Plummer who introduced her to drinking. Despite her being just 21, he often took her to Austrian bars after shooting. These outings revealed another layer of the actor's struggle, his dependence on alcohol. Plummer himself admitted that much of his time on set was clouded by drinking. He recalled being intoxicated during the Grand Salzburg festival scene, an irony not lost on him as he stood among choirs and children, portraying a man of authority and discipline. The habit began to take its toll physically. His costumes became tight as his weight shifted, and wardrobe adjustments had to be made. To the outside world, he appeared every inch the handsome, brooding Captain von Trapp. Behind the camera, he was quietly unraveling. Even as he delivered a performance that earned worldwide admiration, Plummer felt trapped by the role. He considered the script sentimental to the point of absurdity and referred to the film with bitter sarcasm as The Sound of Mucus. His disdain was not only for the story, but for what it represented to him, a part that lacked depth, tethering him to an image he never wanted. And standing beside Julie Andrews, who embodied everything the film celebrated, only sharpened his resentment. While The Sound of Music painted Maria as a near-saintly figure who softened a strict naval captain and saved his children with song, the truth of her life was more complex, and in some ways more heartbreaking. Born in Vienna in 1905, Maria lost her parents early and was raised by a violent uncle who tried to strip her of her faith and impose his atheist beliefs. One day, thinking she was attending a Bach concert, she wandered into a Catholic church. The words of the priests overwhelmed her, and she felt a sudden pull toward religion. After college, she entered the Benedictine Abbey of Nonnberg in Salzburg, never imagining that a request for a governess would alter her destiny. Georg von Trapp had recently lost his wife and was struggling to raise his children. Maria was sent from the convent to care for one of his daughters, but she quickly grew close to all the children. Though she wasn't initially attracted to Georg, she loved the family she had found. When Georg proposed marriage, Maria hesitated, but the nuns convinced her it was God's will. They wed in 1927, and Maria soon took charge of the household. Unlike the film's version of events, Georg was not the cold disciplinarian portrayed by Plummer. He was remembered as gentle and affectionate, playing music with his children and supporting his wife. The couple faced devastating financial loss during the Great Depression. Their wealth collapsed, forcing Maria to dismiss servants, rent out rooms, and tighten every corner of the budget. More than that, she transformed the family's love of singing from a hobby into a livelihood, leading to the creation of the Von Trapp family singers. Their fame grew quickly, attracting the attention of the Nazi regime. Georg was offered a high naval post, and Rupert a prestigious medical position, if they would cooperate. But Georg refused. Instead, the family chose exile, boarding a train to Italy rather than marching across the Alps as Hollywood later suggested. For all of Maria's resilience, Hollywood showed her little respect. She appeared as an extra in the film, even alongside her daughter Rosemarie, yet when the premiere was held, she was not invited. Producers told her there were not enough seats, since they had been saved for celebrities. The woman whose life inspired one of the greatest films of all time was left standing outside, a guest to her own story. That cruelty mirrored what Christopher Plummer felt in another way. A disconnect between reality and Hollywood's polished illusions, a truth wrapped in sentimentality that neither he nor Maria could quite embrace. The final version of The Sound of Music feels so natural today that it is hard to imagine anyone else as Maria or Captain Von Trapp. Yet in the early 1960s, Hollywood nearly gave the world a very different film. Doris Day, who had dominated the box office throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, was considered a leading candidate for Maria. Audrey Hepburn, fresh from My Fair Lady, was also approached, as were Shirley Jones, Leslie Caron, and Anne Bancroft. Each actress brought a distinct image: Hepburn's elegance, Caron's French charm, Bancroft's intensity, but none matched the combination of warmth and musical strength that Julie Andrews carried with her from Mary Poppins. For Captain Von Trapp, two surprising names were on the table: Yul Brynner, already famous for The King and I, and Sean Connery, whose fame as James Bond was exploding. Early talks suggested pairing Doris Day with Connery, a glamorous Hollywood couple on screen. But director Robert Wise and writer Ernest Lehman wanted authenticity and chemistry, and they settled on Andrews and a relatively unknown Canadian stage actor, Christopher Plummer. In retrospect, the decision was perfect for audiences. For Plummer, however, it became a double-edged sword. Even supporting parts had curious twists. Richard Dreyfuss, who would later become a major star in Jaws, 1975, auditioned for the role of Frederick, one of the Von Trapp boys. The casting team praised his acting, but his lack of dancing skills cost him the role. Nicholas Hammond, who would later play Spider-Man on television, was chosen instead. These what-ifs show how precarious the casting process was and how different the film might have been. Filming itself was a mixture of beauty and hardship. Production began in Salzburg in March 1964, with scenes shot in the Alps and historic abbeys. The landscape was breathtaking, but the weather often worked against them. Charmian Carr nearly broke her ankle during the 16 going on 17 number, and Plummer's heavy drinking created real complications. He later admitted to being drunk during the music festival scene, one of the film's most dramatic moments. Costumes grew tight as his drinking led to weight gain, frustrating the wardrobe department. And then came the deeper problem: his disdain for the script itself. Plummer found it unbearably sentimental. He complained that the character of Georg had been flattened into a stern caricature, far removed from the gentle, loving man Maria von Trapp had described. He famously called the production The Sound of Mucus, dismissing its sweetness as gooey and shallow. What the world saw as magic, Plummer saw as artistic compromise. He once confessed it felt like flogging a dead horse, trying to inject life into a role that offered no complexity. Yet despite his bitterness, the cruel irony remained. This was the role that would define him forever. No matter how many Shakespearean performances he gave, no matter how many acclaimed films he later appeared in, audiences always returned to the image of Captain Von Trapp standing beside Julie Andrews. For Plummer, the role that made him famous also became a prison, locking him into an image he had tried so hard to resist. When The Sound of Music premiered in 1965, it quickly became more than just another Hollywood musical. It turned into a cultural phenomenon, the kind of film parents passed on to their children for generations. Christopher Plummer could not escape it, no matter how hard he tried. In interviews, he often downplayed the movie, calling it overly sweet and even awful. For years, he avoided watching it, insisting that his real career lay in darker, more demanding roles. Yet to the public, he was forever Captain Von Trapp. After the film, Plummer threw himself into new projects to redefine his career. He appeared in The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964, Waterloo, 1970, The Man Who Would Be King, 1975, and later in The Insider, 1999, and A Beautiful Mind, 2001. In 2011, he finally won an Academy Award for Beginners, becoming the oldest actor at the time to win an Oscar. He also earned multiple Tonys and Emmys, achieving the Triple Crown of acting. Yet no matter how many honors he received, journalists always brought the conversation back to the sound of music. The very film he dismissed as sentimental was the one that guaranteed his immortality. His relationship with Julie Andrews followed a similar arc. At first, he couldn't stand her. Her discipline, her positivity, her constant kindness made him feel smothered. "Like being hit over the head with a Valentine's card every day," he joked. He called her Miss Disney, a sarcastic reference to her wholesome image after Mary Poppins. But time revealed the truth. What he once mocked, he later came to admire. Andrews, for her part, never spoke poorly of him. She often defended him in interviews, calling him brilliant, complex, and deeply professional, even as he distanced himself from the film that bound them together. As the years passed, their bond deepened into friendship. They reunited often at public events, interviews, and anniversaries of the film. Plummer's criticisms softened. He admitted that while the role had been unfulfilling, the movie's impact could not be denied. He began to recognize that its legacy mattered more than his personal frustrations. Andrews, with her grace, seemed to forgive his earlier barbs. Their story became less about resentment and more about reconciliation. When Christopher Plummer passed away on February 5, 2021, at the age of 91 after a fall at his Connecticut home, Julie Andrews released a statement that captured the tenderness of their later years. "The world has lost a consummate actor today, and I have lost a cherished friend," she wrote. "I treasure the memories of our work together and all the humor and fun we shared through the years." Her words were heavy with love and loss, showing just how far they had come since those difficult days in Salzburg. In the end, Plummer's confession about not being able to stand Julie Andrews tells a story larger than simple dislike. It speaks of an artist wrestling with a role he never wanted, of a man fighting against being typecast, and of a career that spanned triumphs and struggles. And it shows how time, honesty, and forgiveness can turn irritation into lifelong friendship. The sadness lies in knowing that the tension between them could have broken something fragile, but instead, it matured into one of Hollywood's most enduring bonds. Christopher Plummer never hid his frustrations with the sound of music or with Julie Andrews during those early days, yet their story did not end in resentment. What began as irritation slowly turned into mutual respect and, in the end, a cherished friendship that lasted until his final days. His words remind us that even the brightest films carry shadows behind the scenes, and even the sweetest bonds can begin in conflict. What about you? Do you think Christopher Plummer was too harsh on Julie Andrews, or was he simply brave enough to say what others would not? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.